Sometimes what is killing you is not what the specialists are being paid to look for. On the 12th floor of St. Augustine Medical Center, in the private wing, where the walls smelled like money and antiseptic, a billionaire was losing a battle that 20 doctors were not even sure how to name. Machines hummed and beeped softly around his bed. Monitors cast cold blue light over a face that used to appear on magazine covers. Ethan Cross, the man who had turned a college app into a global tech empire, lay in a $4 million hospital suite while the best medical minds in the country whispered and frowned and ordered. One more round of tests, that suite was. Designed so that sickness would look less like sickness. The ventilator tubing was hidden behind walnut paneling. The oxygen ports were disguised inside brushed brass fixtures. The flowers came from a florist that only delivered to 4 zip codes in the entire country. If you glanced quickly, it looked like a luxury hotel room that happened to have a heart monitor. Into that world walked a woman in an inexpensive pair of white sneakers. Pushing a cleaning cart that squeaked on the polished floor, Claire Monroe scanned her badge, stepped through the sliding glass door, and became invisible the way she had learned to become invisible every night. The nurses looked past her. The doctors did not look at her at all. Her uniform, that standard pale gray with the hospital logo over the heart, acted like camouflage. It told everyone exactly what box to put her in, and exactly why they did not need to know anything else. She snapped on gloves, felt the familiar powder against her fingers, and inhaled. Disinfectant. Fresh linens. Expensive cologne that still clung to his clothes, and something else. A faint metallic trace underneath it all, like the air in an old machine shop, just for a second, then gone. Her chemistry brain jolted awake, so hard that her hand froze over the trash bag. The monitors beside Ethan painted an ugly picture in glowing numbers. Heart rate too high. Blood pressure unpredictable. His skin had that strange, not quite jaundiced color that was not textbook yellow, but wrong in a way she could not ignore. His hair, once thick in those interviews she used to hate watch on her phone, had thinned out in uneven patches. His eyebrows, too. When she looked closer, his fingernails were not just pale. They had a faint shadow at the base, the kind of subtle discoloration most people would never notice. Claire noticed everything. It was a survival habit. 10 feet away, near the window that faced the skyline, the lead physician moved like a man who had never once worried that his opinion would be questioned. Dr. Lionel Hart. Silver hair, immaculate white coat, Harvard ring glinting when he gestured. Around him, the team clustered in an arc of expensive watches and tired eyes. "We have exhausted our conventional pathways," Dr. Hart said in a low, controlled voice. "Mr. Cross's liver function continues to decline. Neurological deficits are progressing. The autoimmune panel is inconclusive. The oncology workup is negative. We are missing something." Claire kept her head bent over the bedside table, wiping the surface in slow circles, but every word slid straight into her memory. She had trained herself to listen that way when she still sat in lecture halls instead of break rooms, when she used to underline toxicology, terms in a textbook with a scholarship sticker on the front. She had been a star. Once, valedictorian, full ride into a chemistry program that promised a straight line into research labs and white coats and grant funding. Then her father's truck rolled on an icy road 5 days before Christmas, and straight lines vanished. There were medical bills and a little sister who woke up screaming at night in a mortgage that did not care about dreams. Claire dropped out in the middle of her second year and stepped into whatever job would keep the lights on. The degree had. The mind had not. Now she scrubbed sinks and emptied biohazard bins and read medical journals on her battered secondhand phone during lunch, scrolling past paywalls, piecing together knowledge like a jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box. As she moved around Ethan's bed, Claire's eyes did what they always did. They cataloged, bruising at the 4 sites. Slight tremor in his fingers, even in sleep. A stack of charts at the foot of the bed with terms she recognized and terms she wanted to look up later. Peripheral neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress, cognitive changes, Each symptom had its own line in the record, its own theory, its own specialist. To Claire, it did not look like 10 separate mysteries. It looked like one pattern. Dr. Hart glanced in her direction without really seeing her. "The cleaning staff needs to finish quickly," he said to the room, not to her. "We have a consult with neurology in 15 minutes. That was his way of sweeping her out with the dust. "Yes," Dr. Claire said automatically, even though he had not spoken her name. She stepped back, closer to the bathroom door. Becoming part of the furniture, part of the wallpaper, part of the background that important people did not register from that angle. She could see the marble counter where Ethan's personal items had been arranged like props in a lifestyle ad. A toothbrush from a brand that cost more than her electric bill. A bottle of imported cologne. A sleek black jar of hand cream with a label in French. And a tiny gold emblem that screamed limited edition. She frowned. Yesterday, that jar had been on the tray table by his bed. Today it sat on the counter, closer to the sink, with a thin sheen of product on the rim, like someone had just used it in a hurry. In chemistry, small inconsistencies told big truths. Claire filed that fact away in the same mental drawer where she stored the metallic smell, the nail discoloration, the uneven hair loss, the complaints she had overheard about burning in the legs and pins and needles, from a man who used to walk on stage like he owned the world. Behind her, the low murmur of the doctors rose and fell. Could this still be autoimmune? One voice asked. "We have thrown every biologic at him," another answered. "Nothing holds." "What about paraneoplastic syndromes?" "Imaging is clean. Tumor markers are negative." Claire moved her cart toward the door, pretending not to hear, heart thudding. Mind assembling molecules and mechanisms on an invisible whiteboard that no one else could see. A thought flickered at the edge of memory. It smelled like irony and old fluorescent light. A lecture hall. A slide with a list of classic but rare poisons. Hair loss. Peripheral neuropathy. Gastrointestinal distress. Metallic taste. The elevator doors closed on the private wing as she rolled her cart inside. "They do not see you," she told herself, watching her reflection in the stainless steel wall. "But you see everything, Claire." Rode the late bus home with the smell of disinfectant still, clinging to her hair. Outside the hospital, the city was all neon and noise, rideshare headlights sliding past glass towers, food trucks closing down for the night. Inside the bus, the light was harsh and flat, buzzing over cracked plastic seats and people half asleep. Claire sat by the window, cleaning schedule folded in her pocket, mind replaying the image of Ethan Cross's fingernails and that elegant black jar on the marble. Counter. Hair loss, neuropathy, metallic smell, gastrointestinal distress. Her thoughts lined up symptoms like molecules on a lab bench. Somewhere under all the exhaustion, something old and sharp inside. Her was waking up. The bus jolted over a pothole and the memory hit her as hard as the bump. Different fluorescent lights. A lecture hall instead of a hospital corridor. A younger Claire, at 19, front row, spine straight, pen tapping against a notebook full of color-coded notes. On the projector screen, her toxicology professor had clicked to a slide labeled classic but rare, heavy metal poisons. He had talked about how some of them used to be called the perfect poison, colorless, odorless, hard to detect unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. He had listed symptoms: nausea, neuropathies, hair loss, subtle changes in cognition. He had said, most people will never see a case like this in their entire careers. But if you do, you must be the one in the room who remembers. Back then, Claire had believed she would be one of those people. She had been the first in her family to attend college. A full scholarship. A letter that had made her mother cry over the kitchen sink. Part-time job in the library. Late nights in the lab. Professors telling her she had a gift. One of them had even said, you could run a department someday. Then her father's truck had hit black ice on a county road in January. One phone call had snapped that future in half. There were funeral costs. There was a 12-year-old sister who screamed herself awake every night. There was a mortgage payment and an insurance policy that turned out to have more fine print than actual coverage. The financial aid office had offered sympathetic looks and very little else to Claire. Had signed withdrawal papers with shaking hands, promising herself she would come back in a semester or two. One semester became years. Tuition rose. Wages did not. All the while she held on to her chemistry textbooks, stacked them carefully in every cramped apartment she moved through, turning pages on her days off until the ink started to blur at the corners. Now, at 31, she cleaned a hospital that shared a campus with the university she had left. The bus hissed to a stop near her building. She climbed the stairs to a second-floor unit that smelled like reheated pasta and laundry detergent. Inside, her younger sister Lily slept on the couch with a textbook open on her chest and the television murmuring in the background. On the screen, a business channel replayed an old interview with Ethan Cross. He looked different in the clip, fuller in the face, confident in that easy way that came from never worrying about bus schedules. The ticker under his image called him the architect of the next digital age. The host laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. Footage rolled of his sprawling estate, his private jet, his glamorous fiancée in a silver gown on some red carpet. The contrast hit Claire like a slap. In one building, a man who owned multiple homes lay in a private suite that cost more per night than her monthly rent. In another, she stretched paychecks to cover rent, Lily's community college fees, and their mother's medication. Yet she was the one who had recognized something off in his nails, his hair, and the chemical ghost in the air. Claire muted the television and pulled an old binder off the shelf. Pages rustled. Highlighted terms glowed under the lamp. She found the chapter on heavy metals, traced a finger down the list of toxidromes, and felt the hairs on her arms rise as symptoms lined up perfectly with what she had seen. By the time she lay down on her own narrow bed, the sky outside had begun to pale. She slept for 3.5 hours before her alarm dragged her up again. There was no space in her life for a full breakdown. There was only coffee, a quick check that Lily had made it to class, a text to her mother about refilling prescriptions, and then another bus back to St. Augustine Medical Center. She chose the night shift for a reason. Nights were quieter. Fewer executives. Fewer visitors who looked at her like she was part of the furniture. Fewer supervisors hovering. At night, conversations in hallways were less guarded, and Claire could move through them, absorbing details, stitching them together in the staff entrance. The security guard scanned her badge with the same bored motion as always. He did not see that her mind was already 3 floors ahead, back in that private suite. Back with the man the city treated like a legend, and she treated like a case study that did not add up. On her first break, she sat alone in the employee cafeteria with a vending machine, coffee growing cold in front of her, and her phone open to medical databases. She could not afford full access, but abstracts gave her plenty. Case reports: thallium, deliberate poisoning, misdiagnosed as autoimmune disease, misdiagnosed as gastrointestinal disorder, misdiagnosed as stress. Her pulse climbed as she read. When she pushed her cart toward the private wing again, it felt less like routine and more like intention. She passed framed photographs of founding donors whose names she could recite but whose lives would never intersect with hers. They did not see her. That was fine. She was not there to be seen. She was there to see. And when the door to Ethan Cross's suite slid open for her that night, Claire stepped through not only as a cleaner, but as the one person in the building who had started to connect the dots. The first time Ethan Cross spoke to Claire, his eyes were still closed. It was after midnight in the very important person wing, the hour when even the monitors seemed to beep more softly. The glass door to his suite slid open with a hush, and Claire pushed her cart inside. Moving in the careful, quiet way that came from 1,000 nights of practice, outside the tall window, the city glowed in scattered points of light. Inside, the room felt like a stage set that had forgotten it was supposed to be comforting. Neutral artwork, soft lamps, hidden machines that still cast hard numbers. Claire emptied a trash can, straightened a blanket that had slipped off his shoulder, and checked his face again. Same as before. That strange, almost yellow look, as if his body was fading from the inside out. The thinning hair? The tremor in his hand. She reached for the bedside table. The sleek black jar was back there again, closer this time to his dominant hand. Someone had placed it as if they wanted to make sure it would be used. She felt the floor tilt under her. She had seen it that morning on the counter. Now it had moved, and there was a smear of cream near the lid, glossy and faintly reflective under the light. She caught the tiniest hint of that metal shadow in the air again when she leaned closer to wipe the table. "Smells like machines," a hoarse voice murmured. Claire jerked and almost dropped the cloth. Ethan's eyes were barely open. Just slits, unfocused. But he was awake enough to notice that one detail. Awake enough to speak, she forced her voice to stay steady. "Sorry, sir. I will be quick," she said. "Take your time," he whispered, words slow and thick. "You are the only one who does not poke holes in me." It was a small attempt at humor, and it landed heavier than he probably meant. Claire did not laugh, but a corner of her mouth moved on instinct. "I only poke holes in dust," she answered. "And maybe in mysteries." If he heard that last part, there was no sign of it. His eyelids dropped again. The monitors hummed on. But something in that brief exchange fixed itself inside her. He was still in there. Not the man from the business interviews, not the polished public persona, but a human being trapped in a body that kept failing with no clear reason why. She finished the room and stepped back into the hallway just as two residents approached with a tablet. Their conversation low and intense. "His nerve conduction study looks worse." One said, "The rheumatology team is still leaning autoimmune." The other replied, "They are talking about trying another immunosuppressant. It will destroy whatever liver function he has left." They're grasping at something. Hart looks exhausted. Claire moved her cart slower, letting their words sink in. Immunosuppressant. Liver. Worse. Her textbook pages flipped in her head. She could almost see the paragraph that had warned about treating the wrong thing. About how some poisons only dug in deeper when the body's natural defenses were tamped down. In the next 2 nights, the pattern grew clearer. Every time she came in after a visit from certain people, Ethan looked worse. Once, after a visit from his fiancée, she saw the jar open on the tray. The faint residue on his hands, where someone had rubbed the cream into his skin in a loving, automatic gesture. Later that night, a nurse complained in the hallway that his pain had spiked and his legs were on fire. Claire began timing her cleaning to his schedule. Early in the night for surface work. Later, when the corridors emptied, to pass by the nurse's station and listen. Neurology consult delayed. Toxicology not indicated at this time. Liver enzymes trending down. Kidney markers unstable. A thorough, expensive attempt to find a cause. Focusing in every direction except the one that glowed red in her mind. She could feel the question building in her chest like pressure. The first person she tried to ask was Nurse Rosa, a woman in her 40s who worked most of the same night shifts and sometimes slipped. "Claire, extra coffee from the staff pot, Claire." Waited until Rosa had finished documenting medications. And until no one else stood within earshot. "Can I ask you something about Mr. Cross?" Claire began, fingers tightening on the handle of her cart. Rosa glanced up, tired but not unkind. "Sure, as long as it is not gossip." "I am too tired for gossip." "It is not gossip," Claire said. She took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Have any of the doctors considered heavy metal poisoning?" "There is a specific one that fits his symptoms. The hair loss, the peripheral neuropathy, the abdominal pain. It would not always show up on a standard panel, especially if it is being given slowly over time." Rosa's face shifted from open to guarded in a heartbeat. "Claire," she said quietly, "you are good at what you do. But you are environmental services. You cannot give medical input on patients. That is not how this works." "No," Claire said. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. "I used to study this in school. Before I had to leave, I remember this specific pattern." If someone ordered a test for Claire, Rosa cut her off, voice firmer now. If you are worried, you can report something odd you have seen, like a spill or a safety problem. But diagnosis is not your role. Please do not talk like this where others can hear. It will cause trouble. For you, Rosa squeezed her arm, a quick, anxious gesture. Then turned back to her charting. Claire stood there with the words she had not said, burning the back of her throat. Back in the linen closet, she braced her hands on a metal shelf and let the frustration move through her in one long, silent wave. She did not have the luxury of storming out or making speeches. She had rent. She had her mother's medication. She had Lily's classes. But somewhere upstairs, a man was being poisoned. She believed that now, with the cold certainty of chemistry, the kind that did not care about feelings or hierarchies, the warning did not come from a doctor. It came from a machine. It was almost 2 a.m. when the alarm sounded from Ethan Cross's room. The overhead speaker crackled. Then the monotone voice announced a code for the very important person wing. Claire was wiping down a nurse's station computer when the words hit. Room number. His room. She froze for half a second, then moved to the side as a wave of people rushed past her. Nurses, respiratory therapists, a tall man from cardiology still pulling on his white coat. At the back, with his jaw clenched and his hair more disordered than usual, strode Dr. Lionel Hart. Claire pushed her cart down the corridor until she reached the corner that allowed her to see into the open doorway without being in anyone's way. Inside, the calm luxury of the suite had shattered. The monitors were screaming instead of humming. A nurse called out numbers, heart rate, oxygen saturation, blood pressure dropping. Ethan's body jerked once in the bed as someone pushed medication through an intravenous line. Liver enzymes are through the roof, a resident said over the noise. Kidney function just crashed. We are missing something, Dr. Hart snapped, voice hard now. Run a full toxicology panel again. I want everything. Pharmaceuticals, recreational drugs, herbal supplements, anything. A younger physician near the foot of the bed spoke up, his voice edged with cautious concern. Could this be environmental? He asked. Something from food, water, or topical products. The pattern of neuropathy and hair loss, combined with the liver and kidney damage, it feels systemic. We have already tested the environment in this room twice, Dr. Hart shot back. Air, surfaces, water, the standard panels found nothing. Focus on medical causes, not amateur detective theories. The younger doctor fell silent. Claire watched his face drop, watched him fold his uncertainty back into the obedient. Mask everyone in the room more for the senior specialist. The team worked furiously. After long minutes that felt like an hour, the alarms quieted. The numbers shifted from red back to yellow. Ethan lay still again. But the stillness felt thinner, more fragile, like a sheet of glass with a crack running right down the center. As the crowd dispersed, Claire stepped back with her cart, letting them pass. No one looked at her. No one asked what she had seen. The emptiness where that question should have been burned hotter than embarrassment. On her break, she sat in the staff lounge, coffee untouched in front of her, heart still pounding from the code. She pictured the slide again from that old lecture. The heavy metal that had once been used in rat, poison, and espionage. Thallium. She whispered the word out loud for the first time. Thallium. Thallium. It fit too well. Hair loss in uneven patches, ascending peripheral neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress, subtle cognitive changes, multi-organ failure when the load became too high, perfect poison, the professor had said. Hard to detect unless you specifically ordered a test for it. Ethan was running out of time. While everyone looked in the wrong direction, the next day, Claire made a decision. On her way in, she stopped at the visitor's kiosk and took a blank piece of hospital stationery and a pen. In the cleaning supply closet, she leaned against a shelf and wrote in neat block letters. The way she used to fill exam blue books, check for thallium poisoning. Symptom pattern is classic. Hair loss, ascending neuropathy, abdominal pain, liver and kidney involvement. Standard heavy metal screens may miss low. Repeated doses. She stared at the words. then folded the paper once. Dr. Hart's office sat near the end of the corridor. Door half open, the way it usually was when he was bouncing between consults. Claire timed her cleaning route so that she passed when he was not inside. She stepped in, emptied his trash can, wiped his desk, and placed the folded note on top of his clipboard. Halfway under a stack of lab reports so it would not be obvious who had left it, but not so buried that it would be ignored. Her hands shook as she walked out. The following afternoon, she saw the result. Claire had taken an extra 15 minutes to restock paper towels and trash bags, stretching the task so she could linger near the conference room where the diagnostic team held their meetings. The door was not completely closed. Voices carried. And apparently, Dr. Hart was saying, dry amusement in his tone, "We have a new member of the diagnostic committee. Someone from Environmental Services left an anonymous note on my clipboard suggesting thallium poisoning." Laughter rippled through the room. Claire felt it through the wall. "You are kidding," one physician said. "We ran heavy metal panels when he arrived. All negative." "Exactly," Hart replied. "Everyone with a search engine thinks they are a diagnostician now. Next week, the barista will be recommending chemotherapy protocols." More laughter. A chair scraped. Someone made a joke Claire could not quite hear over the thud of her own pulse. She stepped back, pressing her spine against the cool plaster. For a moment, shame washed over her so strong that she could not breathe. They had not only dismissed the idea, they had turned it into entertainment. Her name had not been spoken, but her role had. The cleaning staff. Environmental Services. The people who carried trash bags and never carried opinions that mattered. She closed her eyes. Let the wave pass and listened again. "We will keep the focus on what we can measure," Hart concluded. "Autoimmune? Rare metabolic disorders? Leave the poison theories to novels." The room fell quieter, then chairs moved, and the meeting broke up. Claire pushed her cart away from the door and kept moving. Her cheeks burned, her eyes stung. But underneath the humiliation was something harder and colder. The chemistry did not care who wrote it down on a folded piece of paper. The pattern was still the pattern. Patient life was more important than her pride. That night, she tried a different route. She waited near the elevators, till she saw the younger doctor who had spoken up during the code. Medium height, dark hair, badge identifying him as Noah Kim, internal medicine. He held a tablet in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, walking like he was late but still thinking through a case. "Dr. Kim?" Claire said, stepping forward just enough to be noticed. He blinked, surprised that she was addressing him directly. "Yes." "I am sorry to bother you," Claire said. "I clean Mr. Cross's room most nights. I have been watching his symptom pattern and reading. I believe he may be suffering from thallium poisoning. The hair loss and the ascending neuropathy, the abdominal pain, the way his liver and kidneys are failing. The panels you ran when he came in might not pick it up if the doses are small and repeated. You would need a specific targeted test or a different protocol." Dr. Kim's expression went through several rapid changes. Confusion. Recognition of the term. Then discomfort, that is. "An interesting theory," he said slowly. "But we do not base our work on anonymous research. We have already tested for heavy metals. I am sure the attending team will consider all possibilities." "I am not asking you to treat him based on my word," Claire said. She heard the edge in her own voice now. "I am asking someone to order the right test before his organs fail completely." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "I have to be in the intensive care unit," he said. "If you are concerned, you should raise it with nursing leadership. There is a chain of command for a reason. I appreciate that you care, but you are putting yourself at risk by getting involved like this." He stepped around her and was gone down the hallway. Later that evening, as she refilled a supply cart near the security office, the head of security approached her. His uniform was crisp, his face serious. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "we have had reports that you are discussing medical details with staff and attempting to influence patient care. That is outside the scope of your role. I need to be very clear. If that continues, there could be disciplinary action up to and including termination." Claire felt the words land like a blow. Termination. No job. No paycheck. No rent. No medication. No tuition for Lily. I understand, she said quietly. I will stay within my duties. He nodded and walked away satisfied. Claire stood in the shadow of the supply shelves, heart pounding, head spinning. Every system around her was telling her to be quiet, to mop and wipe and go home and pretend she had never noticed the smell, the nails, the hair, the pattern, but she could still see Ethan's face on the television in her living room. She could still hear his hoarse attempt at a joke. She could still hear the professor's voice in that old classroom saying, "You may be the only person in the room who recognizes this. And if you are, then the responsibility is yours." At the end of her shift, in the empty break room, with the vending machines humming, Claire stared at her reflection in the dark window. The uniform made her look like every other cleaner in the hospital. Inside that uniform, she knew something that nobody else in the building was willing to see. Proof meant chemicals. Not opinions. Claire knew that, as clearly as she knew her own name. Feelings could be ignored. A cleaner's suspicion could be mocked. But a reaction in a test tube, a color change that matched a textbook diagram, that was something even Dr. Hart would have to look at. The problem was simple and brutal. She no longer had a lab. She had mops, disinfectant, and a key to a supply room. At the end of that shift, she rode the bus home on autopilot. The city drifted past outside the window as a blur of storefronts and traffic lights. Inside her head, equations lined up with memories. She remembered cheap undergrad lab kits. She remembered how certain ions behaved under certain conditions. She remembered that you did not always need expensive equipment to prove that something was there. You just needed to know what reaction to force in the apartment. Lily noticed the tension before Claire said a word. "You are late," Lily said, closing her laptop. Long night. Claire hung her jacket, listened to the building's old pipes rattle, and searched for a version of the truth that did not scare her sister. "There was a rough case," she said. "Someone very important is very sick. I see the room a lot." Lily frowned. "You look like you were about to take an exam." Claire almost laughed at that because it was close. It felt like the hardest exam of her life, and there would be no second chance. After Lily went to bed, Claire cleared the kitchen table. She spread out her old binder, the toxicology chapters, notes that had survived moves and years, and spilled coffee. Her fingers traced the section about thallium again. There it was, the list of symptoms, the mechanism of action, the note that standard urine screens could miss low, chronic exposure, the reminder that hair analysis and special reagents could show what basic panels did not in the margin. In younger handwriting, she had written, "Perfect poison. Perfect pattern. Never forget this." She stared at the words until her eyes blurred. To test the cream, she would need a small sample. She would need containers. She would need a way to isolate the metal ions enough to make them react. She did not have access to specialized reagents anymore, but she did have access to cleaning chemicals. Many of those were built on the same base components she had once measured in milliliters. She slept for 2 hours and woke up as if pulled. On the way to the hospital that evening, she stopped at a discount store and bought a box of baking soda and a roll of aluminum foil, items that would not raise eyebrows inside a supply closet. At the hospital, she signed in as usual. The security guard barely glanced up. Her badge beeped. Her uniform did its job. It made her unremarkable. In the private wing, she waited for a moment when Ethan's room was empty of visitors. Nurses went in and out. Specialists came and left. Finally, there was a small gap. She checked the board, saw his status unchanged, and pushed her cart inside. The black jar sat on the tray table again, lid tightened, label catching the light. Up close, the cream inside had a faint shimmer that was not quite normal. Claire lifted it as if to wipe under it, heart pounding so loud she thought it might trigger the monitors. From her cart, she pulled a small, sterile specimen cup she had accidentally kept from a supply refill earlier in the week. With practiced speed, she twisted off the jar lid, scooped a small amount of cream into the cup with a tongue depressor, and sealed both containers. The amount missing from the original jar was so tiny that no one who was not measuring grams would notice. She slipped the specimen cup into the deep pocket of her scrubbed pants, and put the jar back exactly where it had been. Her hands did not stop shaking until she was in the maintenance closet at the far end of the corridor, the one with the flickering light where no one ever stayed longer than necessary. She closed the door, turned the lock, and exhaled. The closet smelled like bleach and old dust. Shelves held bottles and jugs with warning labels that made other staff nervous. To Claire, they just looked like raw materials. She laid a square of aluminum foil on an upturned bucket to serve as a work surface. She opened the specimen cup and used the back of a plastic spoon to smear the cream into a thin layer. She sprinkled a measured pinch of baking soda over it, then added drops from a hospital cleaning solution that she knew contained specific ions. She watched as the mixture fizzed slightly, then settled. For a long second, nothing happened. Then slowly, a pale but undeniable color shift spread through the residue. The exact hue she remembered from the laboratory demonstration years ago. The reaction was crude, not controlled, but it was the same family. The same telltale sign that a heavy metal from that list was present. Her mouth went dry. She held the foil closer to the weak overhead light and felt cold all over. She took out her phone and snapped several photos from different angles, zooming in so that the color change was clear and obvious. The phone was old and the camera was not sharp, but it was documentation. It was more than a theory now. Someone had taken the perfect delivery system for slow poisoning and disguised it as self-care. Claire cleaned up carefully. She sealed what was left of the sample, wrapped the used foil in layers of paper towels, and put the waste into a biohazard bag so that no one would accidentally touch it. The cup with the remaining cream went into her locker. She knew it was against every rule, but rules had already failed the man upstairs. On her break, she used a public computer in the staff lounge. She logged into the limited internet access available and searched for thallium case reports. The stories she skimmed made her stomach flip. People misdiagnosed for months. Families burying loved ones because nobody had thought to order the right test. In the cases where someone had caught it in time, the pattern was the same. One person had noticed the link. One person had pushed past disbelief. She printed a few pages of abstracts, highlighting the key phrases with a pen she borrowed from the nurse's station. Hair analysis, targeted blood testing, antidote protocols, the use of a compound called Prussian blue to bind the toxin by the end of the night. She had a small stack of evidence in her locker, photographs of the reaction, pages describing classic thallium poisoning, a handwritten timeline of Ethan's worsening symptoms that matched the days. Certain visitors had brought personal products into his room. It was not a full formal lab report. It was not an official test from the hospital's own toxicology department. But it was enough to argue that there was a real, deadly possibility that everyone else had missed. The next question was simple and terrifying. How do you walk into a room full of people who have already laughed at you and make them listen anyway? Claire stared at her locker door, at the cheap metal and the smudge where her thumb always rested. Her job, and everything that depended on it, sat on one side of that decision. Ethan Cross's life sat on the other. When the end of her shift came, and the sky outside the loading dock was just turning gray, she did not go straight home. Instead, she checked the schedule posted outside the conference room. There was a full team meeting about Ethan's case at 2 o'clock the next afternoon, for the first time in years. She planned her entire day around being in the same room as the people who never saw her, with proof in her hands that they could not afford to ignore. At 1:45 in the afternoon, Claire stood outside the conference room with her heart pounding in her throat. The hallway on this floor did not feel like the rest of the hospital. The carpet was thicker. The walls carried framed degrees and glossy photos of surgical teams that had changed lives. A brass plaque by the door read, "Multidisciplinary Case Review." Someone had added Conference B beneath it in a less expensive font. As if the hospital were trying to pretend that hierarchy did not exist even in its signs. Claire wore a fresh uniform. The gray fabric was pressed, the badge clipped straight. In her hands she held a plain manila folder swollen with papers, her phone with the photos of the crude color change test, and a sealed specimen cup that contained what was left of the hand cream. She was not scheduled to work this shift. She was not on the agenda. No one had invited her. Through the partly open door, she heard the low murmur of voices and the occasional rustle of paper. She caught Dr. Hart's tone first, calm, authoritative, tired. "We have ruled out infection, malignancy, and autoimmune disease with reasonable certainty," he was saying. "His organ function is deteriorating despite every intervention. We need ideas." Another voice spoke. "An oncologist. Could this be an atypical lymphoma that is not showing up?" "A neurologist. His nerve conduction studies suggest a toxic process, but nothing we can match in the usual parameters." "A cardiologist. If his electrolytes destabilize again, I am not sure we will get him back." Claire looked at the clock. 1:49. If she waited too long, they would wrap up, and she would lose the one moment when all of them were in the same room at the same time. Her palms felt damp around the folder. Her mind flashed through the warnings. The laughter after her note, the security threat about overstepping, the word termination. She thought about Ethan Cross's fingernails, the metallic smell, the patchy hair loss, the alarm screaming at 2 a.m, the professor's voice saying, "If you are the only one who recognizes this, then the responsibility is yours." At 1:50 exactly, she took a breath, lifted her chin, and pushed the door open. The room was almost full. Around the long table sat more than a dozen specialists, some in white coats, some in suits, all with badges and reputations that meant something in the outside world. At the head of the table stood Dr. Lionel Hart, with a tablet in his hand. Several heads turned toward the movement at the door, expecting a nurse or an administrator. They saw Claire instead. For a second, no one spoke. The hum of the overhead projector filled the silence. "This is a closed meeting," Hart said first. His voice was not rude. It was the tone people used when they asked a janitor to come back later. "Environmental services can attend after we are finished." Claire felt every eye on her. Her muscles wanted to pull her backward. Her hand moved forward instead, setting the manila folder down on the edge of the table with a small, firm sound. "Dr. Hart," she said. Her voice shook on the first word and then steadied. "I know who is killing Mr. Cross. He is being poisoned with thallium. I can show you." The room inhaled together. "This is inappropriate," one of the older physicians snapped. "You cannot be in here. Security can escort you out if necessary," another added. Dr. Hart raised a hand, not to invite her to speak, but to control the room. "Ms. Monroe," he said, glancing at her badge for the first time since she had started cleaning his office months ago. "You are out of line. This is a serious clinical discussion. You are not qualified to diagnose anyone. Please step outside." Claire swallowed. The urge to apologize fought with the image of Ethan's monitors sliding into red. "With respect," she said, "no one in this building can afford for me to walk out right now." She opened the folder with stiff fingers and spread the contents on the table, as if she were laying out a lab report in a classroom. Printed abstracts with sections highlighted, a handwritten chart of symptoms with dates that matched his daily notes. Her own timeline linking those to visitor logs she had copied down at the nurse's station when no one was looking. She placed the printed photo of the crude color change reaction in the center. "A younger voice spoke from halfway down the table. "Is that the cleaner from Cross's floor?" Dr. Noah Kim asked, frowning in confusion. "The one who talked to me in the hallway?" "Yes," Claire said, meeting his gaze. "And I am the person who has been in his room almost every night since he arrived. I see what you see, and I see what you do not. His pattern matches thallium poisoning." The room shifted. Skepticism hung heavy, but curiosity cracked it in a few faces. A woman with short hair and a badge that identified her as Dr. Meera Patel, toxicology, leaned forward slightly. "Explain your reasoning," she said. Briefly, Claire grabbed onto that sliver of permission. "Hair loss and uneven patches," she began, ticking points off on her fingers. "Peripheral neuropathy that started in his feet and has been moving upward. Severe gastrointestinal pain early on. Progressive cognitive changes. Liver and kidney failure with no clear cause. That symptom cluster is classic for thallium exposure. Not acute, but chronic. Low dose. Repeated. We tested for heavy metals when he arrived. Someone objected. You ran a standard screen, Claire said immediately. The words came from somewhere deep. From the version of herself that used to answer questions in lectures without raising her hand. Those panels do not always catch low-level repeated dosing, especially if the person has already received fluids or binding agents for other suspected toxins. You have been treating possibilities that look similar on the outside. Meanwhile, the actual poison has been accumulating. Dr. Hart's jaw tightened. And you know this how? He asked. From an internet search? From 8 years of studying chemistry before I had to leave school to support my family, Claire answered. She did not raise her voice, but she did not look away. From advanced toxicology electives. From a professor who spent half a semester making sure we never forgot these patterns because other people always do. She lifted the specimen cup and set it gently next to the SU. Photo. This is a sample of Mr. Cross's hand cream, she said. The black jar he uses every day that his fiancée brings, the one that is always in different positions when I clean the room. When I tested a small amount with field reagents, I improvised from hospital supplies. I got a color change consistent with thallium ions. It is not a formal assay, but the chemistry is sound. Dr. Patel narrowed her eyes at the photo, at the residue on the foil. What reagents did you use? She asked. Claire told her. The make of the cleaning solution, the base and the powder, the type of reaction she had set up, the same way she would have explained a lab procedure in a classroom. She described the control sample she had run from a regular lotion bottle she kept in her locker, which had not changed color at all. Dr. Patel listened without interrupting, then sat back slowly, in a controlled setting. That reaction is one of the options for detecting thallium, she said to the room. Crude, yes. Improvised, yes. But the sequence she is describing is not something a random search would teach you. It is practical toxicology. Dr. Hart exhaled sharply. Even if we entertain this theory, he said, cannot base treatment on a test done in a maintenance closet by someone without credentials. The liability alone you do not have to treat yet, Claire cut in. Interrupting a man like him would have terrified the younger version of herself. It still terrified her now. You only have to look. Order a targeted blood test for thallium. Send the cream to the hospital laboratory as a toxicology sample. Cut a small strand of his hair and analyze it for heavy metals over time. If I am wrong, the result will say so. If I am right and you wait, he could die. Silence dropped over the table again. The buzzing projector fan sounded suddenly loud. Dr. Kim glanced between Hart and Patel, then spoke, his tone more confident than the last time she had heard him. Lionel, he said, using the first name carefully, with respect. This does make sense with his neuropathy and the hair changes. We would be negligent not to rule it out properly. A targeted test is not a dangerous intervention. It is a question. We are out of good answers. Another physician nodded slowly. We have ordered rarer tests on thinner hypotheses, he admitted. We are talking about a reversible cause of organ failure. If this is real and we miss it because we were too proud to listen to a cleaner, that is not a risk I want on my conscience. The word hung there, proud. Hart's face shifted just slightly. Claire watched him think, the way she had watched him think through complex lab results. Dr. Patel folded her hands. I will authorize the tests under toxicology, she said. Full thallium panel on blood and urine. Hair sample analysis. And we will have the cream analyzed formally. If nothing is there, this will be a footnote. If it is there, then Ms. Monroe may have just saved this man's life. Hart closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and nodded once, curtly. Fine, he said. Order them. Mark them stat. He looked at Claire, really looked at her. For what felt like the first time, if this turns out to be a distraction, he said, you have put your job at risk for nothing. Claire met his gaze with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. If this turns out to be a distraction, she said, I will take that. If it is not, then you have already put his life at risk by ignoring it. Dr. Patel stood. I will go down to the laboratory right now, she said. Have the nurses draw the samples and send that cream with chain of custody documentation? We will know soon enough. The room moved into action. Chairs scraped. Orders were entered into tablets. For a moment, no one seemed to remember that the person who had shifted the entire meeting was still standing at the end of the table in a gray uniform. Then Dr. Kim stepped toward her. Ms. Monroe, he said quietly, thank you for not giving up. Words felt strange and bright in the same place, where the laughter had burned earlier that week. Claire gathered the remaining papers back into her folder with hands that had finally started to tremble, now that the command in her voice was no longer needed. As she stepped out into the hallway, the door swinging shut behind her, one thought repeated itself over and over in her head. Now the chemistry would speak for itself. The results come. It's back faster than anyone expects. Claire spends the next hours pretending to do her job. She wipes counters she has already wiped. She rearranges supply shelves that do not need rearranging. Every time a lab tech walks by with a cooler or a clipboard, her heart jumps into her throat. By early evening, the private wing feels tight with tension. Nurses speak in lower voices. Dr. Kim moves between stations more quickly than usual, his tablet in his hand, his eyes scanning for updates that have not appeared yet. Claire's restocking gloves when she hears it. Dr. Hart to Conference B. The overhead speaker calls. Dr. Patel to Conference B. Her fingers go numb around the cardboard box. She sets it down, forces herself not to run, and walks with deliberate slowness toward the same room where she stood that afternoon. The door is almost closed this time. A thin slice of light spills into the hall. Inside, she hears Dr. Patel's voice, sharper than before. The blood and urine are positive for thallium, she says. Significantly elevated. This is not incidental exposure. This is deliberate, ongoing poisoning. Someone exhales a curse under his breath. The hand cream? Hart asks. High concentration, Patel answers. The toxicology lab confirmed the presence of thallium salts in the sample. Whoever compounded that product either knew exactly what they were doing or used a contaminated source so badly it should be criminal. Given the levels and the frequency of use you documented, this pattern aligns perfectly with chronic poisoning. There is a beat of heavy silence. Claire exhales so quietly that no sound comes out. The hallway seems to tilt. She grips the doorframe to keep her balance. Can we treat this? A voice asks. It is Noah Kim. Yes, Patel says. And there is a new energy in her tone now, focused. We need to start. Prussian blew immediately to bind the thallium and stop further gastrointestinal reabsorption. We will support his organs while his body clears the toxin. It will not be instant, but this is one of the few scenarios where we have a targeted antidote and a real chance. And the source? Another doctor asks. We have to stop it from reaching him, Hart answers this time, voice clipped. Nursing will be instructed that no personal products are to be applied from outside vendors, he says. Security will seize the remaining cream. We will involve law enforcement. This is now a criminal matter as well as a medical one. As if summoned by his words, 2 security officers pass Claire in the hallway, headed toward Ethan's suite. One holds an empty evidence bag. She turns and follows at a distance. Far enough to be part of the background, close enough to see in the room. Ethan lies as before, pale and still. Monitors tracing out fragile lines of life. The black jar sits on the tray table. Seeing it now, knowing what is inside, makes Claire's skin crawl. The officer snaps on gloves, lifts the jar with formal care, and places it into the evidence bag. The soft crackle of plastic sounds louder than the monitor beeps. You are certain this is the delivery? He asks. Laboratory confirmed thallium in the cream, Dr. Patel says from the doorway. Chain of custody for that sample goes through Ms. Monroe, Environmental Services. She collected it, and she identified the pattern that led us here. Document her name. The officer nods and writes on a form attached to the bag. Claire hears. Her own name spoken in that clinical tone and feels something shift. Until now, she has been invisible in every official story that happens in these halls. In this one, her name is ink on a chain of custody log. A moment later, the medical team moves in. Orders go up on the electronic board. Pharmacy rushes to prepare the Prussian blue. Nurses hang new intravenous lines and adjust monitors. For the first time since Ethan arrived, the room feels like it is moving toward a specific target instead of flailing in the dark as they work. Another pair of figures appears at the far end of the hall. Two people in dark suits, badges at their belts, moving with the quiet purpose of individuals who are used to walking into bad situations and asking hard questions. Federal agents. Claire steps back against the wall to give them space. Heart racing again, but this time for a different reason. The medical mystery is becoming a criminal case, and she knows that somewhere between those two lines, someone with a lot of power is about to learn that their perfect plan has failed because a woman who mops floors refused to stop thinking like a scientist. The antidote changes everything, but not all at once. Within an hour, the pharmacy sends up the deep blue capsules. Nurses double-check orders, scan barcodes, and begin the protocol. Claire watches from the doorway of another room as they administer the first doses through the feeding tube. Then hang new bags of fluids to support Ethan's struggling organs. The monitors do not miraculously turn green. There is no instant transformation. But as the hours pass, the wild swings start to narrow. His heart rate steadies by a few beats. His blood pressure stops crashing and climbing in violent waves. The numbers look less like a disaster and more like a climb out of a hole. The agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation set up in a small conference room down the hall. They talk with security, with nurses, with doctors. They request visitor logs, camera footage, any record of who has come in and out of Ethan's suite and what they carried. Claire keeps working. Trash is still trash. Floors still need cleaning. Hospital life does not pause. Even when a billionaire's mystery illness becomes an attempted murder case, she is wiping down a break room table when a nurse appears in the doorway. Claire. The nurse says, "The toxicology team and the federal agents would like to speak with you." They said as soon as you are free. Her first instinct is to look down at her uniform, as if that can somehow disqualify her. "I can go now," she says, in the conference room. The atmosphere is different from the doctor's meeting earlier. There is no laughter, no eye-rolling. Just a row of serious faces and a recorder on the table. Dr. Meera Patel sits near the middle, hands folded. Beside her are two agents in dark suits, badges clipped to their belts. One introduces himself as Special Agent Ramirez, the other as Special Agent Cole. Dr. Hart looks from Ethan to Claire. For a second, that familiar wall of hierarchy tries to slide back into place in his posture, in his eyes. Then he straightens his shoulders in a different way. "Ms. Monroe," he says, loud enough for Ethan to hear, "you should come in." "What?" The cart handle is suddenly slick under her palms. She steps into the room, the place where she has always been background. "Now feeling like the center of a spotlight, Mr. Cross," Hart says. "This is Claire Monroe. She identified the source of your poisoning when 20 specialists, including myself, failed to do so. The treatment that is saving your life is a direct result of her observation and her insistence." The room goes very quiet. Ethan looks at her. Really looks. Not as staff. Not as someone who changes sheets. As the person Hart has just credited with changing his fate. "Thank you," he whispers, "for seeing what everyone else missed." Behind her, one pair of hands begins to clap. Dr. Kim, then a nurse. Then, another doctor. The sound builds, awkward at first, then solid. Claire stands in the middle of it, the woman in gray who refused to stay silent. Finally, and undeniably visible, the hospital could not quietly file away what had happened in a drawer. There was an internal review, an external investigation, and a long meeting where administrators tried to find language that admitted failure without losing face. Through all of it, Claire kept showing up for her shifts, pushing her cart through the same hallways, except now people saw her. Doctors who used to look past her made eye contact. Nurses who once warned her to stay quiet now pulled her aside to say, "You were right. I am glad you did not give up." Even the head of security found her in the cafeteria to say awkwardly, "I am sorry for threatening your job. I was wrong." A week after Ethan woke up, the chief medical officer called Claire into an office with windows that looked out over the city. Dr. Eleanor Hayes sat behind the desk, with human resources and legal on either side. It felt like the start of a disciplinary hearing, until Claire saw the folder with the word commendation on the front. "Ms. Monroe," Dr. Hayes said, "your actions place this institution in an unusual position. You demonstrated sophisticated scientific reasoning while working outside a clinical role. You also exposed a serious blind spot in how we listen to staff." She slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a formal letter of recognition, a bonus larger than any check Claire had ever held, and an offer. The hospital would pay for her to complete a bachelor's degree in chemistry if she chose to return. In exchange, she would transition from full-time cleaning to a split role. Part-time in environmental services, part-time as an assistant in the toxicology department under Dr. Patel. With mentorship built in, it was more than Claire had let herself imagine, and less than she knew was possible. The decision did not belong only to the hospital. 2 months later, when Ethan was strong enough to climb stairs without a nurse, he asked his assistant to schedule a meeting off campus. Claire met him in the conference room of a glass tower downtown. The last time she had seen him out of bed, he had been a two-dimensional figure on her television. Now he stood in front of her in a tailored suit that hung a little looser than before, color back in his face, eyes clear. "Claire," he said, using her first name like an equal, "please sit. I owe you more than a quick thank you beside a hospital bed." He did not talk about money first. He talked about what it felt like to realize that every doctor on his case had missed something that a woman in a gray uniform had seen. He talked about listening in his half-dream state while she explained molecules under her breath, how the sound of her voice had cut through the fog even when the words did not. "I built companies on the idea that talent is everything," he said. "But my world only looked for talent in certain rooms. You shattered that for me." Then he slid a different folder across the table. Inside was a full scholarship package underwritten by his foundation, covering tuition, books, and living expenses for Claire to finish her degree. There was also a guaranteed position waiting in his newly funded medical toxicology research initiative. Working in partnership with St. Augustine and Dr. Patel's team, "This is not a favor," Ethan said. "This is an investment. The world needs your mind in a lab, not only on a night shift. The stipend includes childcare and flexibility. I asked about your family. I am not offering you a choice between them and this." Claire's eyes stung. For the first time, the choice in front of her did not involve losing something essential. She said yes. Time bent. 1 year later, she walked across the campus she had left in her 20s. A student identification card on a lanyard around her neck and a hospital badge that now read, "Toxicology assistant," clipped to her pocket. She split her days between lecture halls and labs that smelled like ethanol and possibility. In the same hospital where she had once only mopped floors, Dr. Patel asked for her input on tricky cases. Dr. Hart nodded at her in the hallway, the stiffness in his posture replaced by something like respect. Nurse Rosa sent her photos of the unit's bulletin board the day the hospital put up a small plaque that said, "In honor of Claire Monroe," whose observation reminded us that every role matters. Through it all, Ethan stayed in her orbit. At first, it was updates through Dr. Patel. Then it was occasional coffee in the hospital cafeteria when he came in for follow-up visits. He asked about her classes, listened to her excitement and frustration over problem sets, and told her about restructuring his company to fund early detection research and scholarship programs. Somewhere in those conversations, the air between them shifted. He stopped. Being only the billionaire she saved, she stopped. Being only the woman who solved the poisoning. They became two people who had both almost lost everything and were trying to use their second chance as well. On the day she finally collected her degree, Claire stood in a cap and gown on a stage under bright lights. In the audience, Lily cheered until her voice cracked. Their mother dabbed at her eyes. In the reserved seating section, Ethan stood with Dr. Patel and Dr. Hayes. clapping until his palms hurt. After the ceremony, under an oak tree on the edge of campus, Ethan handed her a small card. "The board just voted," he said. "We are establishing the Monroe Fellowship for Overlooked Talent in Science. It is for students who had to stop their education to take care of family or work. Your story is the model. I would like you to sit on the selection committee. As a partner." The word partner landed with a different weight. They walked together past the science building, trading stories about first jobs and worse bosses. It was easy and careful at the same time. Before they parted, he hesitated. "When you are ready," he said, "I would like to know you outside of hospitals and conference rooms. No case discussions. No crisis. Just dinner." As Ethan and Claire, it was an invitation, not a rescue. She smiled. "Ask me again after my first semester of graduate school," she said. "I will owe myself a celebration by then." 2 years later, in a quiet office lined with journals and shared projects, someone called her Dr. Monroe for the first time. It fit. It had been earned in lecture halls, in late-night labs, and in the fluorescent light of a maintenance closet, where she refused to stop being a scientist. When the phone rang with a request from another hospital struggling with a strange poisoning case, she answered with calm certainty. "This is Dr. Claire Monroe," she said. "How can I help you?" She was still the same woman who once moved through corridors unseen. The difference now was that the world had learned to look for brilliance in places it used to ignore.